So we spent some time looking over our reference photo and reinterpreting the initial kind of canon of proportion study and trying to give it a little bit more specificity with relation to, what we actually see in terms of the shape of the eyes or the shape of the mouth and the nostrils. And it's nice to kind of divide the drawing up into a process like this, because upon returning to the drawing, you can see things that you got right and things that you got wrong, things that need to change. Sometimes we need to go back in at this point and say, hey, are the eyes still on the same axis? Does the general angle of the face and the angle of the mouth and the eyes and everything, does everything still line up? And it seems things are in pretty good shape at this point, but really this next step that we want to do is more about kind of adding more value. This is mostly contour line and kind of using line to describe what's there. There's some value, but we've really been focusing dominantly on line. At this point, we're gonna get a little bit more aggressive in terms of value. One of the things we start to discuss the fact that there's kind of a generalized tonality. All the shadow side is kind of on this side of the image. The cast shadows are thrown in this direction, and there's really much more shadow going on this side of the face and much more light happening on this side of the face. And when we can get that overall tonal description a little more accurate, it tends to start to make the drawing feel a little bit more like the photograph that we're looking at. So I like to go in and just add the value shapes. I got some lines here from my drawing earlier that allows me to start to figure out where some of my value areas need to be. But in general, I'm just going to kind of do some overall shading of particular areas that help me begin. Now this whole eye sits in an orbital. It's all a very dark area, and so I don't have any problem rendering over that whole thing, just putting it all back in more of a dark tone shadow. This shadow kind of runs up here on this side of the head, and at this point, our continuous tone rendering technique, we're adding and subtracting. So we might put in a large area value like this and then take it out with the kneaded eraser where we need to. So we don't have to be overly cautious as we move along here, because we know we got that eraser to come along and fix anything. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's better when you're drawing with the eraser. The mark making and so forth, actually quite a bit more true to life sometimes when things are drawn with the eraser as opposed to the pencil. Here we see a lot of shadow happening over on this side and a lot of dark, and so I'm not gonna hold back over here. I know I can get pretty dark and a lot of what's going on over here. I'm not bearing down really hard. I try to use the tip of the pencil to really get a lot of that value to begin to show up. Now I know this is kind of a cast shadow created by the nose over here. Kind of comes down here and really connects to the nostrils. There's a lot of dark going on. My pencil is getting a little dull. I need to grab a sharper pencil. It's not quite exactly as dark as I want. We got the mouth here. On this side of the mouth here, we see a lot more jutting up and down of the different value shades. I have some closer close-up images here, and we can see different things happening that are really pretty important for our drawing. This whole area over here, kind of that dark part kind of extends over pretty significantly. This area down here also, connects to generally dark areas that there's some kind of juts that extend up right there. Obviously, we're not able to draw every detail, but we begin to kind of understand some of the characteristics of different areas, and it gives us, quite a good bit of information that helps us as we carry forward. I'm going to switch pencils, try to get a little sharper pencil. Let me get some of these darker tones a little more rapidly. The nostrils, we can see here, are very, very defined, right underneath where the nose turns over right there above the nostril. But then, as the shape of the nostril, it actually transitions pretty softly into the nose there, so we don't have a real hard line that we create there. It's actually just we use, at least on my face, we use just kind of a light, or I use kind of a light shadow. We see the shadow here extending over and down the face where the nose is blocking the light there. Pretty dark tone, maybe not quite as dark as what's in the nostril, but it does extend over. There's a shadow to the nose. We start getting some of that shadow in there. We see the nose on this side is actually notably darker than the highlight that happens right here on the side of the face there. And so we continue on here. Starting to get that nose to look a little more like what it's supposed to look like. The mustache here is going to be defined a lot with middle tones, and the particulars of the hair is a little harder to start to articulate early on. It's something we kind of have to experiment with mark making as we go forward with that. We can see the shadow definitely drops down over here where the flesh of the face kind of extends up over there. If we go to the larger picture, we can kind of see how this connects with other areas of the face, maybe a little more dramatically. Definitely a dark moment right there where that shadow extends down. But the overall kind of definition of things starting to look quite a bit more like my face. But the more we work into that, the more things will emerge. This side, the eye also is very much in shadow. There's kind of a strong orbital that's got shadow dominating over here. There's the eyelash, or the eyelid there that kind of extends up dramatically. And the eyes become so essential that shadow does kind of drop down over here like that contour line described. And the eye itself is quite a bit dark. And really that darkness winds up connecting to, there's not a single shape there, but it winds up connecting to the eyelid and eyelashes and things that are around it. And that really is all an extremely dark area that kind of runs up the bottom of the eye brow. Does an interesting little drop right there, so we want to articulate that kind of higher up here, and then drops down, and then the light gets it over to here, so the darkest part of it kind of fades out over there, and we get this kind of darker shadow on this side. There's something of a fold in the so you can see we're really building on those initial drawing lines and things that we had to try to make this seem more and more like my individual features. So those initial things, they weren't perfect, and we're still kind of working to fix them up a little bit, but we're getting there. This shadow over here connects down to this particular area, which I think is all a bit of a cast shadow that is part of the orbital and everything, and this kind of comes up here, starts to connect to a shadow that's over on this side. The thing about so many of these value patterns is they don't, there's not often real hard edges you can grab onto that define kind of where something starts and something stops. The dark of this eyeball, you know, kind of just extends out into the eyelid that's around it. Now we got to keep these on the same axis here. So let's start to try to reassert this particular eyeball here. This one is the darker of the two because it's on the shadow side, but should appear to be from the same guy, and the eye shapes are not absolutely the same. They should be have some of the same characteristics, like this. They tend to kind of angle up and then down over here. And the eyeball has been overlapped by the bottom eyelid. I don't see that happen a huge amount. That's kind of an interesting thing. I really was trying to keep my eyes open in the sunlight, and I think that might be and well, it is definitely for me kind of a unique reality that it's the bottom eyelid that seems to be overlapping. It kind of extends down there, and this kind of just runs up over here. And over here where it empties out into this larger area of shadow. So again, not always is there a huge amount of distinction between things. I'm getting really distinct in terms of the eyelid and the eyelashes that are below it, but in reality there shouldn't be so much of a distinct line. The information is there, but it's in that dark area and should be that to me is a little too dark. This area right here, I think it's a little too dark. So I'm gonna use my kneaded eraser and just lighten it up just a little bit before I work back into it. But this kind of value study, really, I guess the way I consider it is I'm really working on the general nature of it to start out with. I'm getting a little preoccupied with more of the necessary details of it, but kind of first placing in the overall kind of shape of where these things are going to be happening, I think is pretty important. This whole side of the nose should get a certain amount of shadow, and we know there's actually a real dark shadow here where the little rest for my eyeglasses had been. On this side there is another lighter version of the same thing. And continue using these different mark lines that I put in earlier to try to figure out where these different value shapes and things go. There's definitely a little shadow moment over here, little area of shadow. Certainly the only areas of highlight that we're going to wind up leaving, are going to happen there's a pretty good highlight up here, a highlight here, maybe one in the ear here, maybe one here, little highlight over here, highlight here, maybe here, maybe there. So everything can really be knocked back to a middle tone to a degree as we work, because we're going to use our kneaded eraser to bring back the brightest highlights, or even out areas that need to be evened out. So I do continue to kind of work these different areas kind of more generally, because I know that a lot of the necessary subtle shifting that needs to happen eventually can be done with the kneaded eraser when the time comes. This side of the nose here gets a little shadow, extends up there. There's a little bit, I got the highlight of the nose drawn in right there. There's actually a little bit of shadow that runs up against it there. Not a huge amount of shading should be on there, but a little bit. A lot of shadow over here that I haven't attended to, where these kind of beard hairs and things get some of these more gray tones and such. And these things extend out over. I do feel like I can be, again, somewhat general and even arguably over shading at this point, because I'm going to use the eraser. This side gets a little bit of shadow up here. Pretty significant little shadow over there, and even again, trying to use some of the lines I put down before, but some of that will likely change anyways. But I think the idea that in general you're really trying to save absolute white anyways. So you don't really have to labor over the accurate placement of all your darkest darks, because you're going to go back and adjust and make necessary changes anyways. So I will continue working on this, but I wanted to give you a sense of the process as I do work on it and try to get the different value things articulated accurately. But the notion of general value is very important. One of the things that I haven't done justice to at this point is the reality that the figure itself is one part of it, but in reality the background is an equal part of it. At this point, if I darken up the background behind this guy, if I start to do that and articulate some of that, it's going to make more sense out of what he's built out of, his dark and light patterns. It's actually quite a bit of a shock how much more realism occurs once you start dealing with the background. Probably good that I waited and worked on developing some of those interior shapes, because it really does make a huge difference once you get these value patterns on surrounding things to work. Now here we can notice that here we start to notice that the gray tone of the beard connects to the gray tone of the neck. That's an important thing to recognize and start to make that happen, because that's what's going on optically. That's the reality of the information there. So we're going to start, and in fact, once we get to about right here, some of these darker areas, then the beard starts to become lighter than the background. And that starts to become particularly useful to make the three-dimensional illusion come to life. One of the things you'll see in some of the discussion is the reality of or that you've heard in class potentially, the flip-flop. That if something can be lighter than and darker than the background that it's sitting in, the more illusionistic the illusion becomes. So at this point that we can get the negative spaces start to function. Now this little moment under the collar here is in shadow. Shadow lightens up and gets a little darker right there. That's the type of detail that really helps things start to come to life. Over here, the background is much darker than the shirt and the beard. And in fact, we can start to shape the edge of the face there maybe a little better once we start using the background tones as a way to push the line of that edge of the face over a little bit. But once you start dealing with the background tones, you get a huge kick, because it really does a lot to make the drawing start to make more sense. We're not going to do a lot to define the background in this one. You can see different elements, bushes and architectural stuff, but we're going to just deal with the drawing And the background is just tone. We're not going to have to get real busy with the details of the background. We can just let the values in the background shift from dark to light, kind of be just there, but we don't have to have a lot of definition of exactly what's happening there. This allows me to get that line, that head kind of turns out, turns in, turns out a little bit. We could get some of that information working this way. This does make me look again and I say, oh man, all this needs to be darker. This whole area needs to be shaded back. I think this is a lot of video to watch, probably, and so I'll tell you what I want to do is maybe take a few photos as it progresses to kind of help you see different stages in its development. But you certainly can see now the kind of generalized application of value that starts to make things really make sense and really start to come together visually. And then the background is so important. Once we get everything outside of this chrome dome darkened in, then it's really going to appear to be illuminated and look very three-dimensional. So as you push forward in your drawing, you're going to be looking for the same types of information and the same relationships. What's darker, what's in the shadow areas, what's in the light areas, and that's going to help you to get your individualized features even more individualized and ultimately make your portrait a success. Good luck.